Um, Friends, ladies and gentlemen, before I actually launch into my brief presentation, I couldn't resist responding to some remarks that were made earlier today. And this was the constant references to the kind of reforms made in other countries, and why is it that we can't copy them, in terms of reforms. Now, is it that simple to mimic another country? I mean, if you look at the countries that were mentioned, Malaysia, China, South Korea, Singapore, and now Vietnam. What's so common there? It's the culture. The most difficult thing to change in our context will be the culture. Culture takes years. And all those countries that you see in that area are really, it's the Chinese culture. So it's not easy to think in terms of reforms without changing culture. And to me, that's the biggest issue that we will continue to face as we move forward. Although it's not part of my presentation, but let me come to my presentation now. Was it the film? Okay. Let me try and, you see, I was asked to speak on the vision for equitable and sustainable taxation. My problem is that I find the thought underlying the theme of this roundtable that we need to expand tax revenue capacity is frankly misguided. I will talk about the taxation part in the latter half of my presentation, which will be brief, I assure you. But my fundamental issue is with the mistaken emphasis on raising the tax to GDP ratio, even further. Now, this is a proposal driven by donors, especially the IMF, to achieve some magical, absurd number called the primary deficit. I can give two reasons why I say that, but I'll focus on just one right now. The IMF conducts a basic arithmetic exercise, which is a meaningless exercise, because they try and achieve that magical number using the cash-based single-entry system. For us accountants, it's very simple to ask a very simple question. Where are the liabilities? So what has happened is that huge liabilities are building up outside the system. So if you're looking at the cash-based system, you will end up with a primary deficit, which is a meaningless number, because no one knows what the liability. I challenge any division of the government, any department, attached department of the government, to tell me their liabilities. Take it. So that is, I think it's huge, and I'll come and give examples later. My contention is that this misplaced focus on the tax to GDP ratio. Our tax to GDP ratio now is 11.1%. We conveniently forget the examples that are generally given to us that we should try and copy are India, Bangladesh, and even China, and I'll give you numbers, very simple ones. Ours is 11.1%. India, with a higher per capita income, the tax to GDP ratio is 11.5%. Bangladesh, again with a higher per capita income, has a tax to GDP ratio of 7.5%. China, the World Bank itself says, has a tax to GDP ratio of 7.7%. What are we really trying to achieve? So my contention is that all we have done is that we're really taxing the economy to death in the name of stability. Dead bodies are also very stable, by the way. So you're strangulating an economy to actually achieve some stability, and austerity is the driving force. And what we are doing with austerity is that we are tightening the belt of the rest of the population so that the federal government and the agencies concerned can loosen theirs. My contention is that the biggest issue is really the expenditures which have been running wild. The prioritization has been poor. there is waste, and the government is like a huge employment bureau. It is bloated, it is a limited capability workforce, and they have been self-fixing their perks and privileges, which is really eating up a huge proportion of the budget. The federal government, after the 18th Amendment, still has 43 divisions with 1.3 million employees. More importantly, 1.2 trillion expenditure is being made annually on subjects which have been devolved to the provinces. So what on earth is really going on here? And incidentally, we keep adding on new agencies. 68 new agencies or expansions of existing agencies have happened today. So I keep asking the fund, because I happen to meet them quite regularly, please explain to me, while these agencies are created, what will be the future obligations in terms of the next 3 years? Has anyone seen those numbers? Okay. So now, it's this size of the federal government. Then if you look at the provinces, it's equally bad. I'll give you the example of Punjab. I was the finance minister in 2000. There were 22 departments. And I remember writing a note at that time that there are 7 too many. Punjab today has 48. It's the same story in all the provinces. The pension liabilities has actually touched 33 trillion of the federal and the provincial governments. So you look at the pension liability, and they don't include the pension liabilities of discos, railways, PIA, universities, and so on and so forth. And PTV, of course. SOEs were mentioned by Saifullah, that their accumulated losses are 6 trillion, and that does not include all the actual grants which have been given and equity injections which have been given in the past. And there are additions of 1 trillion annually. Here, most of these state-owned enterprises cannot be privatized. They have to be wound up, liquidated, like the Utility Stores Corporation. That's the only solution. We are wasting our time thinking that they can be privatized. They can't be privatized. Let me move on to one other point before I come to the tax-related issues. There has been the politicized expansion of the public sector development program. I don't know if it's the next one. Okay. There's been a politicized expansion of the public sector development program. Schemes and projects are being added on a daily basis. All of us read it in newspapers. There are now more than 1,300 projects, which based on the original cost and the amount that the government actually spends on the public sector development program, it will take it 14 years to complete. Now we all know, accountants understand, there will be cost overruns. And I'll give you the simplest example, 2 very interesting examples, just to illustrate a point. I wrote them down quickly. Neelam Jhelum was contracted at 85 billion, completed for 540 billion. Original cost was 85, completed for 540 billion, and is now non-operational. Islamabad Airport was contracted for 150 billion. Can anyone take a guess what the completion cost was? Not Dirham Saab. It was 1 trillion. And the IMF and the World Bank and all these multilaterals tell us the problem is not expenditure. The real cost of expenditure today is really debt servicing. But how did we get here? It was these expenditures which have got us to this position in terms of the huge debt that we've accumulated. I mean, just to give you an idea, because we're talking of cost of doing business, today there are 122 regulatory agencies. No clarity on why you want to regulate an activity. I keep asking the obvious question, I understand there are these regulatory. Please explain to me, why do you want to regulate this activity? Tax related issues, ये आप लोगों का रोना मेरे से कहीं ज़्यादा है. और मैं जान के उर्दू में बोल रहा हूँ कि मुझे पता है हम सब जब टैक्स की बात शुरू करते हैं तो शाम गरीबा हर वक्त मना रहे होते हैं. ठीक है, ओके. ये देखिए, the real issue of tax is the lack of trust. The state is seen as an extractive entity, and no one can see what it offers or shows for the revenues that actually go to it. Okay? I'm going to give you the simplest example. The basic responsibility of any state is to assure, or not guarantee, but at least give me assurance of security of life and property. अब वो क्या कह रहे हैं हमें? They keep telling us कि यार दीवारें ऊंची कर लो, 2 guard और रख लो. So if the state can't provide this basic function, you're beginning to wonder why some of these taxes are being paid in the, and so what it's really doing is creating an environment where people would prefer to be in the informal sector, and that's the next point I wanted to make. Yeah, you have high rates on those who were, as you were, in fact, the message you're giving is you were foolish enough to be in the formal system, and thou should be penalized and punished for taking that view. If you're salaried, non-salaried, if you're an auditing firm, pay a tax of 45 to 60%. ठीक है जी? Corporate sector is being asked to pay a tax rate of 50, 60%. And then you're surprised that yaar, investment is not taking place. You know, the investment rate now in Pakistan is the lowest it ever has been. It's 13%. If you take out the annual increase in inventories, you're left with 12%, of which the private sector is investing 9%, 3% is by the public sector. Then you look at the tax regime. Yeah, the complexity has increased over time. The standard question that I ask the IMF team is, please explain to me, have you seen any other country with this kind of tax structure? But this is your core competence. The IMF's core competence is fiscal policy and monetary policy. They don't have any other competence. I say, yeah, you've created this regime. And the regime is what? Apart from the heavy and arbitrary taxation and the coercive powers of the administration that you guys know better than I do, you have a turnover tax, you have a minimum tax, apart from income tax, you have super tax, you have CVT, you have deemed income, and then the withholding taxes, oh, my favorite, which actually generate more than 70% of income taxes. So the withholding taxes, both in terms of income tax and GST, I mean, and then you're a withholding agent because you'll be penalized for not collecting those taxes. So not only do you have multiple rates, you now have multiple agencies because provinces are involved. So you have multiple agencies. And then, of course, what will happen is each agency has a different threshold and a different interpretation of the law. So you guys know this better than I do because you deal with them on a daily basis. But I'm aware of the kind of issues that one sees. The reason I'm emphasizing this whole basis of withholding taxes, frankly, is, let's face it, you're taxing transactions. And what is GDP? GDP is simply the sum of all economic transactions. And through heavy taxation, you're actually ensuring that the number of transactions are reduced. So to me, these are the areas that I think we need to focus on. If I have time, I'll move to some of my recommendations. Otherwise, I'll stop here and pick up the recommendations as part of the roundtable. I prefer to do that as part of the roundtable. Thank you so much indeed.